to Nutrition Rounds with Dr. Danielle Belardo, the podcast for anyone interested in learning about plant-based nutrition through an evidence-based approach. Every week, we share insights and interviews with physicians who are leading experts in nutrition and health. Whether you've been plant-based for many years or are still searching for the perfect diet, Nutrition Rounds will inspire and empower you to live your healthiest life backed by science. Now here's your host, Dr. Danielle Belardo, MD.
Hello, and you are with Danielle Belardo, MD on Nutrition Rounds. And today's episode is all about cardiology. So it's all about my experience at the American College of Cardiology conference last weekend, and I get to interview two incredible, inspiring cardiologists that I look up to immensely. One is Dr. Kim Eagle, and one is Dr. Rob Ostfeld. So I really wanted this episode to be special because the American College of Cardiology means a lot to me. You know, we live in a time where advice on the internet is confusing. There are people making medical decisions based on YouTube videos. There are people following clickbait headlines and articles written by journalists who aren't scientists. For the amount that I have criticized medicine for our lack of nutrition training, as doctors, we really do still know, for as much as we don't know, we know a lot. You know, we dedicate our entire lives to wanting to save patients. And so I want to honor that and honor these cardiologists that I spent last weekend with at the ACC for all of their work and dedication. You know, just so you know, to become a cardiologist, you have to do 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 3 years of internal medicine residency training, then get your board certification in internal medicine, then do 3 years of cardiovascular fellowship, then get your board certification in cardiology, in echo. I'm going to do my boards in lipids as well, in addition to nuclear and vascular studies. So, you know, we spend all of our 20s and our early 30s in training and doing this to become the best doctors we can be. And so I think that there's a lot that you should view on the internet and on social media with a really, really fine lens. Make sure that you're not taking health advice from just anyone. Really discern the health advice you're reading about, whether it be nutrition or anything, and bring up your concerns with your doctor. I think communication is key. Even if your doctor doesn't know about plant-based nutrition, bring the information you have to support it with you if for some reason your doctor opposed it. But let me tell you one thing for sure. At the American College of Cardiology conference, I was able to meet cardiologists from all around the world, and everyone agreed on one thing. Eating more plants and less animal products is better for you and is better for all of us. There didn't seem to be any disagreement there. And so why is the ACC so important to me? Well, I've spent my entire life in training, in education, training to become a cardiologist. And the American College of Cardiology is the professional home for cardiologists across the U.S. There's more than 50,000 members, and this is our leading professional organization for cardiology. The ACC leads in the formation of health policy standards and guidelines. The college operates national registries to measure and improve care, offers cardiovascular accreditation to hospitals and institutions, and provides professional medical education, disseminates cardiovascular research, and bestows credentials upon cardiovascular specialists who meet stringent qualifications. All of the cardiologists I was honored to meet with at the ACC were brilliant and were kind and supportive. And so I just want to thank any of the cardiologists listening who I worked with either in the past during residency, medical school, or if I've met you at ACC, or if I was in any of your talks. I just want to thank you for all of the work you do to contribute to our specialty. I feel so lucky to be a cardiologist training in America and with so many incredible, outstanding physicians that are just changing healthcare as we speak. And so two of these heroes of mine that I was able to interview for the podcast this week are both members of the American College of Cardiology, and they both were speakers at the ACC. So the first part of our interview is with Rob Ostfeld. You guys probably already know this. Rob's one of my very, very, very good friends. And he's a cardiologist who really thinks outside of the box. He's the Director of Preventive Cardiology and the founder and director of the Cardiac Wellness Program at Montefiore Health System. He's an Associate Professor of Medicine at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. He earned his BA from University of Pennsylvania, and he earned his MD from Yale University School of Medicine and his Master's in Science and Epidemiology from the Harvard School of Public Health. He completed his medical internship and residency at Mass General and his cardiology fellowship and research fellowship in preventive medicine at Brigham and Women's Hospital, both teaching hospitals of Harvard Medical School. So his professional interests include cardiovascular disease prevention, medical education, clinical research, and he speaks widely regarding nutrition and prevention. Dr. Ostfeld is one of my greatest friends, but also one of my biggest mentors. He is just phenomenal. He has transformed thousands of lives of patients through plant-based nutrition. He has helped to educate the entire area where his hospital is located. So many wonderful humans. He's been able to educate them about the benefits of plant-based diet in reversing diabetes, hypertension, and helping to prevent cardiovascular disease. So Rob is on the ACC nutrition work group with me. And so it was just very exciting to be able to have him on the podcast. Essentially, what I asked Rob to do was essentially give his talk from ACC that he did last Monday on nutrition for the podcast. You'll hear me interrupt him here and there with some of my interjections and questions and side points. But in general, this is essentially the entire talk he gave with regards to nutrition, plant-based nutrition versus Mediterranean diet versus keto diet. And it was the talk he gave at ACC that was given to cardiologists from around the world about how important nutrition is for our cardiovascular health. It was phenomenal. It was so great. And I'm so excited for you guys to hear it. So the second portion of the podcast is with another hero of mine. And if you follow me on social media, you know that I love Dr. Kim Eagle's podcast, Eagle's Eye View. So Dr. Kim Eagle is the Albion Walter Hewitt Professor of Internal Medicine, Professor of Health Management and Policy at the University of Michigan School of Public Health. He's the director of the Frankel Cardiovascular Center at the University of Michigan. He attended Oregon State University, graduating in 1976, followed by Tufts University Medical School, graduating in 1979. He completed a residency and chief residency in internal medicine at Yale, and then he followed this with research and clinical fellowships in cardiology at Harvard and Mass General. Then additionally, from 1986 to 1994, Dr. Eagle served MGH, where he was promoted as Associate Director of Clinical Cardiology and Associate Professor of Medicine at Harvard before moving to the University of Michigan. At the University of Michigan, Dr. Eagle developed an outcomes research program focusing on quality, cost-effectiveness, practice guidelines, acute coronary syndromes, treatment of aortic diseases, and the fight against childhood obesity, heart disease in special populations, and reuse of pacemakers in third world nations. His outcomes research has led to quality improvement initiatives across the state of Michigan in acute MI, heart failure, coronary intervention. Dr. Eagle has contributed extramural presentations to more than 110,000 learners in 33 U.S. states and 11 countries. And get this, he has published 591 peer-reviewed articles, 69 chapters, and edited 8 books, including his latest, The Heart of a Champion, co-written with legendary Michigan football coach Bo. So Dr. Eagle has served the American College of Cardiology on numerous committees and task forces, and he's the editor of ACC's website, acc.org. He served on the board of trustees from 2001 to 2005, and he received ACC's master designation in 2009 and its National Distinguished Teacher Award in 2012. Dr. Eagle is so wonderful. I mean, I literally listen to his cardiology podcast every week. For anyone listening that's in medical school, internal medicine residency, or cardiovascular fellowship, you have to check out Eagle's Eye View podcast, where he reviews the latest and greatest in cardiovascular disease and guidelines and research and trials in a really succinct and easy to digest manner. It's wonderful. And I was so honored to meet Dr. Eagle and have him on my podcast and talk about the evidence and research. So overall, what I want you to get away from this podcast is science is so important. Research is so important. Knowing how to read a research study appropriately is so important. Guidelines aren't built on YouTube videos, on Instagram posts, or on Twitter news feeds. Guidelines are built through hard work, through years of hard work with many, many, many physicians working together to make sure that everyone is using the best of their knowledge to make our patients the healthiest they can be. And I just think that it's really important in this day and age where there can be a lot of confusion out there to always keep that in mind, that you can't be swayed one way or the other. Don't let social media scare you away from going vegan. Don't let social media intimidate you to change your mind about make any big health concerns or health changes. You can, of course, take everything with a grain of salt and then bring it with you to your provider. And I always, always, always emphasize it's super important to read the information yourself. If someone posts a study, take a look at it. Try to find the primary literature. Digest the information on your own. I do think it's important that everyone has opinions, but as physicians, our best and most important job is to take the best care we can of you. That being said, I am so beyond honored to introduce to you these two cardiologists that I so admire. They are both ethical, wonderful, brilliant, incredible physicians. They've both published tons of research and data on various different topics in cardiovascular disease. So we're going to start out with Dr. Rob Ostfeld, and then we'll move on to Dr. Kim Eagle. Thanks for listening. We're here with Rob Ostfeld, my friend, cardiologist. He's Director of Preventive Cardiology at Montefiore, and we are going to talk about all nutrition that went down at the American College of Cardiology conference. So Rob has been very involved in plant-based nutrition since the beginning and since really most of his career. And he's really created a large plant-based nutrition program at his hospital, and he's very involved in the American College of Cardiology. And thanks to Rob, I am also involved in the ACC nutrition work group. So during ACC, we had this big nutrition debate. It wasn't much of a debate, to be honest, because all of the cardiologists do agree that eating more plants and less animal products is better. But, they still had to present the research and the data and everything. And Rob was the plant-based nutrition arm of the discussion at ACC. So today, you guys are going to get your own access to this exact talk that Rob gave, except Rob's going to just discuss it with me here on the podcast. And he's going to talk about why plant-based nutrition helps with cardiovascular disease and preventing and reversing cardiovascular disease. So Rob, hi, welcome.
Hello, Dr. Belardo, Danielle. It is fantastic to be here with you. And I'm really honored to be able to talk about this topic with you and with your listeners.
Great. So if you guys don't already know, Rob's actually a good friend of mine. So this is going to be a very casual conversation because I talk to Rob all the time because he is very knowledgeable on this area and is quite the expert in plant-based nutrition. So Rob, starting with, first of all, what do you think of ACC in general?
Well, first, you're incredibly generous, and I love the texts that we have over the course of the week. They range from being incredibly hilarious to incredibly educational. So
yeah, we share some echoes. We actually, if you guys don't know this, we'll do an entire podcast episode on this. But if you didn't know this, that me, Rob Ostfeld, Mauricio Gonzalez, and Michelle McMacken, the four of us are like best friends. We have a group text that is just, if you can only imagine, it's just constant nerding out, some complaints, some gifs, some laughs, but we actually have a lot of education that we share, plant-based nutrition information. And me and Rob try to do the cardiology arm of that. But anyway, so Rob, what'd you think of ACC this weekend? It was great, right?
Oh yeah, I thought the ACC was fantastic. And there's so much incredible educational material, the enthusiasm of the fellows, of the attendings. It's really infectious. And, we were talking about this and, I've been going to these meetings for a number of years now, and we can really begin to see a shift where people across the board are embracing nutrition, are embracing that approach to health. It's really wonderful to be a part of it.
For sure. And especially, I think in the era now, I think it's really important. I touch on this with Kim Eagle in the second part of the podcast. In the era of social media, YouTube, Instagram, and like all of these clickbait headlines,
we really do, evidence-based information gets lost. Peer-reviewed research gets lost in the mix, and people don't know what to follow and find. And I think ACC was like a wonderful reminder of how important it is to be following guideline-based medicine and to be also looking at the research and the studies and evaluate everything in our lives from nutrition, wellness, fitness, from a scientific approach.
Completely agree. And the ACC presents a lot of incredible information to support exactly that approach. I mean, your head could spin. The headlines spin 180 degrees from day to day or week to week. So really taking a thoughtful evidence-based approach to it is going to give you the optimal information. Completely agree.
And what I thought was so interesting too is that I mentioned this on the podcast last week, but I had so many cardiologists from across the country mention to me that they listen to the podcast. They really, appreciate plant-based nutrition. They're thinking about integrating more plant-based diet into their life and in their patients' lives. And I really felt like at ACC this year, the cardiologists across the country, the vibe I got was that people were very pro-plants. I really do feel like there's a shift and a change in the dynamic. I really was impressed.
Yeah, I agree. And I think your podcast, honestly, is an incredible resource for us. You've had on such brilliant and incredible guests. And to be honest, we don't get a lot of nutrition education throughout medical training. Multiple studies support that. Times are changing some, but there have been questionnaire studies where, although 90% of cardiologists, of course, agree that nutrition is an important aspect of health, 1% of them felt equipped to be able to discuss it with patients. That was a great study by Dr. DeVries. And that's, one of many along a similar kind of theme. So having a really thoughtful podcast like yours that's very evidence-driven is an incredible resource for us because there's not enough out there yet to fill the need. And there are wonderful CME conferences that interested physicians can go to, like the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine Conference in the summer, our conference at Montefiore, which is a CME conference about prevention and nutrition. And there are many others that are starting, to fill the void. But yours is incredibly accessible and there is a wonderful resource.
Oh, thanks so much. That's very nice of you. I will say that your conference, for anyone that didn't get a chance to go last year, you have to keep your eyes peeled. October, Rob runs a conference at Montefiore, and he brings in various different kind of physicians, scientists to talk about nutrition from the epidemiological level all the way down to the molecular, more cellular level. So it's a really great conference and great place to meet and interact with different scientists and physicians. And it's open to the public as well. So a great conference.
Yeah, thank you very much. November 2nd this year, and our keynote speaker is Walter Willett, Dr. Walter Willett, and Dr. McMacken will be there, Dr. Esselstyn, Dr. Freeman, we will be Dr. Kahn, and we'll be discussing, as you say, clinical research and even information about the microbiome with Dr. Tang and thiacylic acids, newfound GC, et cetera. So we're really excited about it. Thank you.
Super exciting. And Rob and I are actually going to be on a panel together at the PCRM conference with Michelle McMacken, our other bestie. We're going to be on a panel together this July. So if you guys want to hang out with the three of us together, you guys should come to that as well. PCRM is the conference that's run by Neil Barnard, and they are just, one of the most amazing organizations that really helps to push all of this evidence-based information forward. Okay, so Rob, let's get started then. So why don't you describe to everyone, because everyone knows I had to leave ACC early on Sunday, halfway through the day. So I missed Monday, which was the big nutrition day, but I was on consults. But I did live stream your talk from my fellow's office, and it was amazing. So I'm so glad for everyone to get to hear the data and evidence that you presented at the American College of Cardiology. So first, give everyone kind of an overview of what the talk was and who was on the panel and the general overview.
Well, thank you. So the talk was a debate about different dietary patterns, and it was a plant-based diet versus a Mediterranean-style diet versus a ketogenic diet. And I had the honor of presenting about a plant-based diet, and Dr. Emilio Ross, who's one of the co-authors on the PREDIMED study, an amazing study about primary prevention with a Mediterranean style diet. He presented about the Mediterranean style diet, and Dr. James O'Keefe presented about the ketogenic diet. And of course, Dr. Andrew Freeman and Dr. Penny Chris Etherton were the moderators of the panel. So it was a really wonderful group to be with.
It's really an outstanding, panel of individuals who are incredibly accomplished. And I will say that it seems like the general consensus, regardless of people's individual beliefs, the general consensus at the end was eating more plants was better. No one was saying that anyone should be cutting plants and whole foods out of their diet. And cutting out more red processed meats, things like that, was definitely favored upon. Would you agree?
Yeah, 100%. All of our Venn diagrams overlapped. Go plants.
Okay, cool. All right, so let's start. Let's start with, why don't you give us some of the evidence and data for why plant-based diet is an optimal diet?
Oh, well, thank you. So, we started by defining what a plant-based diet is. And basically, a plant-based diet includes all plant-based products and excludes or nearly excludes all animal products. And it's all minimally processed plant-based foods. So if something, has a face or comes from something with a face, ideally don't eat it. It includes tons of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and I stress unrefined whole grains, because none of us think that sugar cookies and white bread are healthful.
Right.
Of course, beans, lentils, soy product or tofu, yams, nuts, and seeds are other things that are under the umbrella of a plant-based diet. So basically, if it has a face or comes from something with a face, ideally avoid it. So we started by talking about coronary artery disease because it was a cardiology conference. So I figured pitch to the batter. So, to my knowledge, the only dietary pattern that has been shown to reverse coronary disease is basically a plant-based diet. And that was the Lifestyle Heart Study, which is a great randomized trial of about 48 patients with stable cholesterol blockages in their heart. And they were randomized to either an experimental arm, which was basically a plant-based diet, but that did include some no-fat milk or low-fat milk, and exercise and psychosocial support, versus a control arm, which was expert care from cardiologists. And if you fast forward 1 year, those who embraced or who were randomized to the healthier lifestyle, their blockages in their heart shrunk, and those in the control arm, their blockages grew.
And what was the amount? It was about 3%, right?
Yeah. So the intervention arm, they shrunk about 2-3%, and the control arm grew about 3 or 4%.
So here's the thing I do want to touch on. So I do get from non-plant eaters that are in cardiology, especially interventionalists, they will argue to say that a 3% change through, imaging and with regards to cath is, that's just the difference between one set of eyes and another. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's a really important point, but I think there's some really important counter arguments to bring up. First of all, these blockages, it's not just somebody looks real quick. These are measured extremely carefully, computerized techniques, et cetera. But first of all, blood flow in a blood vessel or in a tube is related to the fourth power of the radius. So even a little bit more of an opening gives you a lot more flow. Why does that matter? Because that can meaningfully improve symptoms of chest pain or angina. And along those lines, this same group did a different randomized trial with the same kind of intervention in people with stable cholesterol blockages. And those in the experimental arm had less ischemia and fewer symptoms.
So I agree. So I think that one of my arguments for plant-based nutrition and what I try to explain, especially to interventionalists, because, you can see a 2%, 3% difference on cath, you can actually see from injecting, certain vasodilators and stuff like that. But I will say that I think that the difference that I think that we see with plant-based nutrition, first of all, is that in the control group that there was progression. So I think the fact that at the very least, the intervention group showed, even if it's 1% regression, is amazing, because the control group only showed progression of coronary artery disease. And second of all, I think the biggest, one of the big mechanisms is, is the microvascular disease we see as well. And, the fact that plant-based nutrition helps to obviously, vasodilate and help improve endothelial lining and the endothelial cells in the coronary arteries and helps with microvascular angina, which is incredibly difficult to treat.
I completely agree with all your points. And even, I think perhaps even extra important to mention to these, our interventional colleagues who do amazing work, is it's not just the size of the blockage. First of all, the health of the cholesterol plaque and the health of the blood vessel improves when you're eating and living more healthfully. And the circumference of the earth is about 25,000 miles. And on average, we have about 60,000 miles of blood vessels in our body. And I got that from the George Washington University Cardiology website. Who cares? Well, what that means is when you eat more healthfully and you improve the health of your blood vessels, sure, it improves the small area, a few centimeters or so with that blockage, but it improves the 60,000 miles as well. In that lifestyle heart study, if you followed patients for 5 years, the intervention arm, their cholesterol blockages shrunk more, the control group grew more, and most importantly, if you were in the control arm, you had about a 2.5 times higher odds of having a bad cardiovascular event happen. So it shrunk the blockages, it improves the health of the blood vessels, but it also, most importantly, improved outcomes.
That's most important. I think that's a great, I'm glad we're touching on this because this is something I've gotten questions about a lot. And I know you'll agree with me here. Someone will say, oh, I have an 80% mid LAD lesion. Can I get it to be a 50 or 40% to be a plant-based diet? I do not think that can happen. And so what are your thoughts on that? Because I like to say that the changes we saw here in Ornish's trial were, yes, they were, maybe 3%, but I think it's all the other mechanisms for which plant-based nutrition, it's not just cutting a lesion in half, it's all the other mechanisms for which plant-based nutrition improves cardiovascular mortality that are in play here.
I completely agree. Changing the size of the plaque is one of dozens and dozens of reasons why eating this way is healthful. It is the tip of a giant iceberg. I completely agree that changing the size of the blockage with a plant-based diet is really just the tip of the iceberg as to why it's helpful. There are so many mechanisms, which we'll touch on some of them as to why it's helpful for you and will reduce your vascular risk and improve your symptoms.
So what you're saying for people out there listening, so patients listening, because I've had patients that come to me, they may have triple vessel disease, they may need a stent, they may need an intervention. And, you agree as a cardiologist that if it's guideline wise, if this patient needs an intervention, we support them getting the intervention. But I always try to say it's not one or the other. If you do need the intervention, if you're a diabetic with multivessel disease that needs a bypass to give you longer mortality benefit, I support that, but you should be doing plants on top of it.
I 100% agree. We want a belt and suspender prevention. It's not either or. It's all of the above, which includes procedures when necessary, medications, including statins, which have lots of incredibly healthful outcomes and improve the health of plaques and can reduce the risk of heart attacks in some cases, and healthier lifestyle, including a plant-based diet. So it is all of the above to help protect someone.
Our patients' lives come first. And my goal for my patients is to have them live the longest, healthiest life. It's not, my goal isn't to stick it to the pharmaceutical companies and put people in harm. My goal is to have my patients live the longest and healthiest life. So if I can have them live the longest and healthiest life using plant-based nutrition to prevent disease, that's great. But if they already have cardiovascular disease, I'm going to keep them on their statin and their aspirin and also have them follow through with plant-based nutrition.
100% agree. It's all of the above to protect people. And I've seen some of these blogs online. And, in my experience, there's no conspiracy theory out there.
Right.
All of my colleagues, we just want to make people healthier. And for the appropriate person, you do a procedure or not, or a medication or not. and pretty much everybody a healthier lifestyle, is important. And whether I do or do not prescribe a medication or do or do not recommend a procedure has zero impact on, conspiracy related things in my life. Like I'm not paid more, there's no underhanded stuff, nothing.
Wait, I find that so funny that people have this impression that we get paid more when we prescribe a medication. I was like, I've never heard of that. I when we prescribe Lipitor, I don't think we're getting reimbursed any differently than we don't. I don't even know if my hospital even knows.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And I should say, just for total transparency, the way I practice really helping to encourage my patients to pursue a healthier lifestyle and guideline-based medications procedures, I actually earn less because I will spend more time with my patients because it's a lot quicker to write a script than it is to have a detailed conversation about pursuing lifestyle change. So there's no, underhanded conspiracy theory stuff going on that I've personally ever seen.
Good. Well, I'm glad the point we can get across is that we both believe in, guideline-directed medical therapy, and is in addition to lifestyle modification to help our patients live their longest and healthiest lives.
Yes, and circling back to the lifestyle heart study, where they had improved outcomes and they shrunk the size of blockages with a healthier lifestyle. Another thing that helps to reinforce that the importance of that study is they saw a dose-response relationship, meaning the more healthful someone was, meaning the more they embraced the healthier lifestyle, the more their cholesterol blockages shrunk. And there was a study out of India, the Mount Abu heart study, where they had similar findings in about 130 people, when they encouraged them to have a healthier lifestyle and, of course, medications. The more they embraced the healthier lifestyle, the more their cholesterol blockages shrunk. One pushback I hear about the lifestyle heart study is that it was small. There's not a lot of people in it. And that's true. But, if you have a very powerful intervention that does a lot of good, you don't have to have 15,000 people randomized to show that. And in cardiology, we're used to these huge trials. And it's great that we're able to do that. And it really broadens our evidence base in a robust way. And you always want more evidence. But when you have a powerful intervention that changes health quite significantly, you don't need 15,000 people to be in the study. You can see a difference with way fewer. So I think that lends extra support to the study. So the lifestyle heart study in a randomized controlled trial showed that a healthier lifestyle is able to shrink cholesterol blockages. So then we started to talk a little bit about, just like what you were mentioning, what are some of the mechanisms that would help to improve cardiovascular outcomes when someone eats a plant-based diet, which touches on how living this way, sure, it's good for changing a cholesterol blockage, but it's good for you for dozens and dozens of other reasons. Okay, one category is inflammation. And increased inflammation promotes heart disease, is associated with cancer, high blood pressure, diabetes. It's not your friend. And we, of course, know that having less inflammation can be helpful. And in a great randomized trial, the EVADE CAD trial, they took people with coronary artery disease. It was 100 people in the study, and they randomized them to either a vegan diet, meaning no animal products, or the American Heart Association diet. And CRP fell significantly more on the vegan diet.
Can you specify what's the American Heart Association diet?
So the American Heart Association diet, this is one iteration behind the current guidelines, but the American Heart Association is largely based around a Mediterranean or DASH type diet, which recommends more vegetables, more fruits, but also, permits low-fat dairy and some animal products like chicken and fish, and recommends minimizing red meat. So it's certainly much healthier than a typical Western diet, no question. But I would suggest that it's not as healthy as a whole food plant-based diet.
Right.
So inflammation is one, cholesterol is another. LDL cholesterol, we know that the higher your blood LDL or bad cholesterol levels are, the worse you do. Cholesterol does promote atherosclerosis, does promote heart disease, and dietary cholesterol does impact blood levels of cholesterol. I know there's some debate around that, but at any rate, so
why? I have a question though. Why is there such a loud chirping audience that are not cardiologists that I haven't heard of being cardiologists, but they're just on social media saying that your LDL does not have anything to do with cardiovascular mortality?
I can't say that I'm exactly sure. There's no debate within the
debate.
Societies, like zero. We're talking like tens of thousands of cardiologists. There's reams and reams of peer-reviewed, randomized meta-analyses, mechanistic studies.
There's no debate. Your high LDL is dangerous. There's no debate.
And there is, I don't quite know. I think there's a conspiracy, like people are drawn to conspiracy theories, and some people will say, well, having a higher cholesterol level may be able to help you heal cells in your body, which is, I have no basis to think that that's true. And then also people will say, look, people who have low cholesterol levels, who, have cancer or old and sick, they do worse. But look, they have low cholesterol levels. That's just confounding. That's reverse causality.
That's absolutely reverse causality.
Exactly. So what it means is you're so sick, you can't really eat. Your labs are totally out of whack. Your cholesterol falls. It's well known that when you have advanced cancer, your cholesterol levels can fall. Well, okay, you're not dying because you have low cholesterol levels. You're dying, unfortunately, because you have advanced cancer. So it's really, that's like you're saying, the whole clickbait thing where people can get confused by a headline here or there. So in a randomized trial done by Dr. Jenkins up in Canada, he found that a portfolio type diet with plant-based foods, all plant-based, lowers LDL cholesterol about the same as does lovastatin. That's a cholesterol lowering medication, about 30%. That's impressive. And also LDL particles, when they become oxidized, they're particularly atherogenic or irritating to blood vessels. Okay, well, when people who eat a vegetarian style diet, their LDL particles are more resistant to becoming oxidized than those who eat an omnivorous diet. So that's important too. So there's inflammation, there's LDL cholesterol. We also talked about blood pressure. Obviously, increasing blood pressure, high blood pressure, more stroke, more heart disease, kidney disease. It can lead to brain shrinkage. Like, who wants brain shrinkage? So the eating more in various cohort and epidemiologic studies and also randomized trials, eating more plants is associated with having lower incident high blood pressure or lower blood pressure down the line. And one cool analysis from the EPIC Oxford study found that those eating more and more plants, even versus those eating fish, had a lower blood pressure. Another one we talked about was lipoprotein(a), which is a particle that can be attached to LDL cholesterol and is really irritating to blood vessels. And if you have high levels of it, it can promote heart disease, heart attacks. It's not your friend having high levels of it. But we really don't have a good therapy for it yet. There's a lot of study on that right now, but it turns out that a plant-based diet can lower lipoprotein(a) levels.
That was that study out of Texas, right? It was 4 weeks where they were randomized to a vegan diet.
Well, you're exactly right. It's out of Texas. It's Baxter, Montgomery, Roger, Najjar. And it was really a case series, but we don't have a lot out there yet. And it was about 30 people, so it's small, but they significantly lowered lipoprotein(a) levels.
It's fascinating.
60%. So, obviously we need more study in that arena, but it's just another piece in the puzzle.
Absolutely. That was promising. That was like one of the first studies to show that much of at least of a difference in Lp(a) that I can remember.
Yeah, me too. So what we did then is we started talking about more kind of quote unquote novel risk factors. So when you eat a plant-based diet, sure, it can do all the things we talked about, but you know what? It might also be able to modify gene expression. So that's pretty cool. So in a study of patients with early stage prostate cancer, this is just a case series, but they had them eat largely a plant-based diet with some low-fat milk, the same diet that was in the Lifestyle Heart Study. And if you and they'd had exercise and psychosocial support, and if you fast forward about 3 months, many pro-cancer genes were down-regulated in their expression, and anti-cancer genes were up-regulated in their expression. So you can't change your genes per se, but it appears you can change which ones speak, making the healthier ones speak more loudly and the unhealthy ones speak more softly. It's pretty mind-blowing, but it gets even more mind-blowing because this is in animal studies. So this is very speculative in terms of how it relates to humans. But those kinds of epigenetic or changes that turn on healthy genes and off unhealthy genes in animal models are passed on to your kids and grandkids. So what an incredible responsibility if this bears true. What you eat, sure, it affects your health, the planetary health, but it may affect the health of your kids and your grandkids. It's pretty mind-blowing. And then we made a shift to, microbiome, which I know is...
Actually, one quick interjection. Not this week, obviously, but next week, we're going to have an episode with a plant-based pediatrician, and something that actually relates highly to what you just mentioned about the genes. She actually even mentions how there's been research with regards to obesity in children. Even if they're obese in infancy and under the age of 5, even if they lose all the weight, they never lose their higher risk for breast cancer, for multiple different malignancies, even if they lose the weight. So something is to be said by genetic modification at a young age when you have those pluripotent stem cells that are really, developing and changing, and it's just fascinating.
Yeah, and I totally agree. In maternal dietary health, when baby's in utero, really impacts the future health of kids in a variety of ways. And some of them may be related to gene expression, but I can't say that quickly.
All right. So my favorite is gut microbiome. I'm actually going to be doing an entire episode on this, but let's talk about it because it is something I am incredibly interested in.
The microbiome is incredibly fascinating, and that's the bacteria that we have in our gut. Now, we each have like 1 trillion gut bacteria around. And since there's like one of us and 1 trillion of them, you could say that we're really the parasites, not them. But be that as it may, we live and work together symbiotically in ways that can either promote health or not promote health. And when you eat a plant-based diet with more fiber, you select very quickly for a healthier gut microbiome, a healthier population of bacteria that are living in your gut. And within animal models, your gut bacteria could change within a day. And the quickest that I know of in humans is about 5 days. And when you eat animal-based foods, it reverses it. It's not as healthful. The gut microbiome really loves the fiber that's in the whole foods. And it makes a whole bunch of different things, but it makes something called short-chain fatty acids, which can impact health in a lot of ways. One of them is called butyrate. Our gut microbiome can make butyrate. Who cares? Well, butyrate improves the health of the cells lining our colon. And that does a variety of things. First of all, there's a small mucus layer in our colon that separates the gut bacteria from the lining of the colon. And you want that because our immune system would otherwise attack those bacteria that we were hopefully living symbiotically with. But if you're eating more animal products, less fiber, you make less butyrate, and that mucus membrane isn't as thick. And so that bacteria can then interact with our cells, and our body attacks it, kills off some of it, creates inflammation, which goes throughout our whole body. And interestingly, the gram-negative bacteria, which most of the bacteria is in our colon, has something called lipopolysaccharide or endotoxin that it uses to latch on to the mucus.
Wait, and anyone listening, I have a lot of medical school listeners or residents. Everyone must remember lipopolysaccharide because that just like essentially shut off an alarm in my brain. Who doesn't remember that from like microbiome?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, it's basically what causes sepsis.
Exactly.
And so we're sort of having baby sepsis, if you will.
It sets off this chain of reaction of inflammation, of, total body inflammation.
Yeah, it increases free radicals, can make you more hypercoagulable because that lipopolysaccharide can get absorbed into the body and create all kinds of trouble. That butyrate, when you have more by eating more fiber, may also actually impact genes in the enterocytes, or the cells that line the colon, making them make less cholesterol. That butyrate can go to the brain, possibly improving mood and psychological state. It's just epically interesting. And we're just scratching the surface. And of course, an area that you have an incredible amount of expertise and interest in is in trimethylamine oxide, or TMAO, which is a product that the gut microbiome is involved in the formation of. And we know that the higher your TMAO levels in your body, the worse you do from a heart.
So explain why, for you guys who follow me on social media, you've probably seen my posts on TMAO. I do find it very interesting, especially with regards to arrhythmia, but explain why certain people have higher levels of TMAO than others, and kind of what are the downstream effects of having high levels of TMAO?
Sure. Well, there was a really good study where they fed vegans and omnivores a steak. It's for science. So the vegans made very little TMAO, but the omnivores made a good bit. So what's going on? So what's going on is our gut microbiome, because when you eat more animal products, you select for the gut bacteria that can interact with the L-carnitine that is in, or the carnitine that is in the red meat that they were fed. And then your gut microbiome interacts with that, forming something called TMA, and then it goes to the liver and you make TMAO, and that promotes inflammation, makes platelets more sticky, more likely to clot in a bad way, right. Can promote diabetes, worse heart failure. But when you eat the vegan diet, the vegans in this study made virtually no TMAO, or much less, and that is very likely because their gut microbiome is different than the omnivores, and they've selected for bacteria that do not promote the formation of TMAO.
Exactly. So the reason why, what Rob's saying is the reason why people who eat animal products, so when you eat things like red meat, egg yolks, dairy, they're high in something called choline. And then if you eat red meat, other sort of animal products, it's high in something called L-carnitine. Okay. So your gut bacteria, these bacteria that live in your gut, they break it down. They break down choline and L-carnitine, which are just abundant in animal products. They break it down, and your gut bacteria breaks it down into trimethylamine. Then the liver converts trimethylamine into TMAO. It becomes oxidized. So that's why TMAO is so much higher in omnivores than vegans. And as Rob has just mentioned, TMAO is significantly pro-inflammatory and increases, a lot of our inflammatory cytokines like ILB and 1B and TNF-alpha and IL-6 and all of those pathways. So I think it's just fascinating how we're finding that the gut microbiome, these guests in our GI tract, can affect the way our health is of our entire body.
It's really fascinating. And in murine or mouse models, having a plant-based diet, when it interacts with the gut microbiome, creates, not surprisingly, less inflammation, but also less atherosclerosis, which is particularly interesting to us myopic cardiologists. So we're just scratching the surface here, from short-chain fatty acids to TMAO to inflammation and atherosclerosis.
Well, what's interesting too is I want to touch on is that every episode we talk about inflammation essentially with every specialist that I have on, and I think it's so interesting because in cardiovascular disease, I feel like back in the day, inflammation wasn't thought to be such a huge part of it, and now I feel like it's just for the last several years, inflammation's become the hot word in cardiology. Like I think a lot of the way atherosclerosis works isn't just from high fat and cholesterol, like from the actual fat contents. It's from what eating a high saturated fat diet does in an inflammatory way that actually worsens your plaque burden and makes your endothelial cells more unhealthy, right?
I totally agree. And just as when if someone's hungry, they're not like, whoa, man, I could totally go for a bowl of saturated fat right now.
Yeah.
Nobody does. They eat food. And so if they're eating red meat, we'll get into some of the other bad aspects of that, but it's going to have saturated fat. It's going to lead to TMAO formation. It's going to lead to inflammation. So it is that saturated fat comes wrapped in a package that has multiple other deleterious things for your body. And you're absolutely right about the evolution of inflammation. The pathologists, Dr. Ross, have been screaming this toward cardiologists, I don't know, since the 1970s. But it took cardiologists a long time to change, and through the work of Dr. Braunwald, Dr. Ridker, and others, the role of inflammation has become much more well known to cardiologists. So we talked about genes, we talked about microbiome, then we talked about matrix metalloproteinase levels and myeloperoxidase levels, and those are things that promote inflammation and make cholesterol plaques less healthy. Well, there's a study that shows that those eating a vegetarian diet versus an omnivorous diet have lower levels of myeloperoxidase and matrix metalloproteinases. We talked about endothelial progenitor cells. And what that is, as our body, so our endothelial cells are, and this is something that comes up for all aspects of the body, as it ages, the older cells are kind of killed off, and then younger cells from the bone marrow will come in and replace them. And the endothelial progenitor cells are the young endothelial cells from our bone marrow that will go and replace our older, sicker endothelial cells. And it's well known that if you have higher levels of endothelial progenitor cells in your blood, you'll do better long term, probably because it keeps the health of your blood vessels good. So there was a randomized controlled trial where they took young, healthy Okinawan women and they randomized them to the regular diet or the regular diet plus more green leafy vegetables. If they ate more green leafy vegetables, they made more endothelial progenitor cells. Pretty cool.
Pretty cool.
Then we took a step with the plant-based diet over to diabetes, yet another risk factor for heart disease and all kinds of problems. So in a randomized trial done by Dr. Barnard's group, they took people with type 2 diabetes, about 100 of them, and they randomized them for 22 weeks to either a plant-based diet or the American Diabetes Association diet. And those on the plant-based diet did better. They came off more diabetes medications. Their hemoglobin A1C fell numerically, just numerically more. P was 0.09. They lost significantly more weight, and their LDL cholesterol fell significantly more in the vegan arm. And we can circle back to this later, but this, when we talk about the keto diet, but this group, the Dr. Barnard group, also has data where eating more of a plant-based diet in diabetics improves insulin resistance, the underlying reason for diabetes, and beta cell function, the cells in the pancreas that make insulin. So it's not just masking the diabetes, but it appears that it is fixing the underlying cause. And we could circle back to that when we talk about keto because it's a nice contrast. Furthermore, about the diabetes, we talked about how there are multiple epidemiologic or population studies that show that the more plant-based you eat, the less likely you are to develop diabetes. And there's Rotterdam and the Seventh-day Adventists and NHANES data, multiple related epidemiologic studies support that. And actually, there's a cool study by Malik where this was an prospective cohort study. I think they had 4 or 5 million person years of follow-up in this study. And in that study, if you replaced 5% of your calories from animal protein with 5% of calories from plant-based protein, that was associated with significantly less incident diabetes. And it was for fish, it was for poultry. They had so many people in it that they could break it down by different types. So even in that study, replacing animal products with plant-based products is associated with less incident diabetes. And there's this cool Seventh-day Adventist study, the religious organization or group, where in about 8,000 people, if you had at least weekly intake of animal products, at least weekly or more versus none, you had a 74% higher odds of developing diabetes.
The Seventh-day Adventist studies are fascinating to me. It's really interesting.
It's just such an incredibly rich database. and just an amazing population. They really take health so seriously. So this brings up the study by Satija.
Everyone who listens to my podcast, if anyone out there knows Satija, I cite this study. I've done it at every journal club I've ever had to present it. I have posted on Instagram 500 times. Satija, I am your biggest fan. Please come on my podcast. All right, go on.
Dr. Satija is a total rock star.
Dr. Satija is a total rock star. This is my favorite study. You all know this. It's healthful versus unhealthful plant-based diet. It was in JACC in 2017.
Yeah, exactly right. So basically in this study, they looked at a few things. They looked at if you eat a plant-based diet versus an animal-based diet, how do you do? And if you ate a plant-based diet, you did better. But what was particularly interesting is they broke it up into a healthy or an unhealthy plant-based diet. And if you ate a healthy plant-based diet, which is vegetables, fruits, whole grains, you did even better. But if you ate an unhealthy plant-based diet, like sugar, cookies, and white bread, you did worse. And in this study, if you ate an unhealthy plant-based diet, you did a little bit worse than even an animal-based diet. So
exactly. Such a good point. This study is so important. It's important to say that an unhealthy vegan diet is worse than being an omnivore with regards to mortality.
Sure. Well, yeah. So this study, they looked at the hazard ratio for coronary heart disease, and you're absolutely right. They found a higher hazard of coronary heart disease in those eating an unhealthy plant-based diet. So the devil's in the details. And then they have similar data for diabetes. So it's really quite impressive. And we then were talking about, there are meta-analyses of over 800,000 people, where each serving of fruit and vegetables per day was associated with a 5% reduction in mortality, which then brought up the incredible study by Dr. Song, which is in JAMA Internal Medicine in 2016. And in that study, they had about 130,000 people with like 3.5 million person years of follow-up. And just for background, if you follow me for 1 year in a study, that is 1 person year of follow-up. They had 3.5 million person years of follow-up.
Unreal.
So if you replaced just 3% of your calories from animal protein with 3% of calories from plant-based protein, they asked, is it good? Is it not good? Turns out it's good. In this study, if you replace just 3% of your calories from processed red meat with 3% of calories from plant-based protein, that was associated with a 34% lower hazard of death. Unprocessed red meat, 12%, poultry, 6%, fish, 6%, eggs, 18%, dairy, 8%, all significant. And it's also, so that, I won't be accused of being a myopic cardiologist. As you well know, when it comes to processed red meat, the World Health Organization has now listed that as a class 1 carcinogen, meaning it causes cancer.
And explain what a processed red meat would be considered.
That would be like salami, bologna, hot dog, bacon. Yes, exactly. So kind of in summary, to my knowledge, the plant-based diet is the only pattern that has been shown to reverse coronary artery disease. It improves multiple risk factors: inflammation, cholesterol, blood pressure, possibly lipoprotein(a), diabetes. It improves multiple novel risk factors: gene expression, the microbiome, myeloperoxidase levels, endothelial progenitor cells, and it is associated with lower mortality.
I mean, fascinating. This is like exactly like you covered. This is from Rob's talk. We're going to keep making our way through it, but he covered in this very 12 slides, quick bit, pretty much some of the most pivotal studies that really share why plant-based nutrition is the most healthful diet. And that was so amazing. I mean, I will make sure that for this podcast episode, I will 100% have all the references in the show notes so you guys can read these studies. But I just have to tell you that this was really phenomenal. I mean, you really hit the nail on the head on every single big pivotal study that really does give us, I mean, not just a little data, but a ton of data. We're talking multiple studies with 4.5 million person years of follow-up. And, for as much as people can argue about observational or epidemiological studies, there's only so much you can say when it comes to studies that big. There's only so much negative you can say. They're really powerful studies.
Both, thank you very much for your kind words. It was a really fun debate. And I completely agree with you and about, the epidemiologic studies, and it's obviously, as you know, the data supporting plant-based or more of a plant-based diet. It's not just epidemiologic studies.
Right.
As you know, they're randomized trials, they're translational trials, there's basic science test tube mechanistic studies. So across the spectrum of type of evidence, there's support for it.
Absolutely. And I think that we'll go into Mediterranean diet next, but I think it's important. And one thing I want to touch base with you on too, is that I think a big important part of this is, and I think that there's a lot of doctors listening who don't even know the answer to this because it's hard. We're not necessarily trained about this in medical school. I touch on this with Kim Eagle a little bit too, is how, when you're reading a research study, Rob, how are you evaluating? Is this a good study? Is this a shit study? Like, am I going to actually take this data and believe it? Am I going to read the abstract and go through the whole thing? What kind of parameters do you use when you're evaluating research to see if it's even worth your time?
Yeah, well, thank you. What I'll typically do is first go to the methods. How did they do the study? If it's a randomized study where they randomized appropriately, are the two groups equal? The whole point of randomizing is so that you can compare two equal groups. Because one of the weaknesses with epidemiologic studies is that and people say that, association doesn't equal causation. And that's 100% true, but it's a bit of a pejorative as well, because
right.
Epidemiologists, of course, know that, and they take a lot of pains to do multivariate and controlled analyses to try to account for that. And they'll always say in their study, we can't account for unforeseen things. So it's a bit of a pejorative and an extreme oversimplification. But with a randomized trial, what's cool is if you're appropriately randomized, then the blood pressure is definitely going to be equal in both arms, and the cholesterol will be equal, and the age will be equal. But you know what? Maybe eyebrow length is like the most important thing for health ever. But we don't measure it. We don't look at it. Nobody puts it in epidemiologic studies. But in a randomized controlled trial, the eyebrow length should be the same in both groups, as should their genes and other things. So it really equalizes the group. And that's the strength of the randomized trial. So I look at the methods first. I see, if it's a randomized trial, is it appropriately randomized? What did they do were they very specific about what they did in the experimental and the control arms? Were there meaningful differences in terms of the amount of support someone got in the experimental versus the control arms? You kind of want them to be equal. And in the epidemiologic studies, I'll look, is it a prospective cohort, which is a little bit stronger when it comes to epidemiology than, say, a retrospective analysis? How did they control? Did they do propensity score analyses, which tries to make the two groups as equal as possible? So I'd first go to the methods and kind of go through the details of how they did the study to see if I think it's done okay.
Perfect. I love it. And then I always want to remind everyone, whenever you're reading a study that you're actually really sinking your teeth into, I think one of the most important and overlooked things is the appendix of the study. That's where some of the best, graphs, diagrams sometimes are in. And I always like to see where they're also, where they're getting their citations from. A good study, I always like to browse through and see what they've referenced, because you can actually usually find a lot of good literature from the references section of a study you like.
Yeah, that's a great point. And we then part of my talk dove to the Mediterranean style diet, which really is a great diet.
Right.
I mean, it's lots of vegetables and fruits and minimal animal products. It's really very good. And if my patients will say, I really don't want to go plant-based, but I'll do Mediterranean style diet in the traditional Mediterranean form, which is not just put olive oil on whatever you're eating, but lots of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, minimizing animal products, I'll take it. That's great. And so there are a couple of big studies, the Lyon Diet Heart Study and the Preventive study, that really show the benefit of a Mediterranean-style diet compared to a more typical controlled or Western-style diet. And the Lyon Diet Heart Study was secondary prevention, meaning people had a heart attack or a cardiac event already, and the Preventive is primary prevention. And both of them showed meaningful benefit with the Mediterranean style diet. So that's a very good diet. But what was particularly interesting to me about the Predimed diet is before they even did the diet, they a priori before defined an analysis they were going to do when it was done. And they were going to look at a pro-vegetarian dietary pattern. So what they did is they had a lot of dietary information on the people, and they said, well, the more vegetarian people go in this study, eating fewer and fewer animal products, is it good? Is it not good? And their pro-vegetarian pattern definition excluded all animal products, including fish and eggs. And the highest quintile of the pro-vegetarian pattern versus the lowest, you had a 41% lower hazard of death. So under the umbrella of a Mediterranean-style diet, the more plant-based you went, the better you did. And that's reinforced by multiple studies, including the EPIC study, which is a huge prospective cohort study about nutrition and health. And in that study, this one analysis of like 70,000 people, and for every standard deviation increase in fruit and vegetable consumption you had a 14% reduction in mortality. Just supporting eating more plants is better.
So when you brought that point out, because I love that about the vegetarian subset from Predimed, I cite that frequently because I do think it's a great study. I mean, and it was, of course, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, correct? And it's one of the biggest, studies we have in nutrition. But so on the panel with you was one of the creators of the Predimed study. And what did he have to say to you mentioning the subset, the vegetarian subset? Because I find that interesting. I feel like that's hard to deny.
Yeah, I mean, he seemed generally supportive of that theme.
Yeah.
That eating more vegetables and fruits is healthful. I mean, I don't want to put words in Dr. Ross's mouth, but right. I think, like you were saying in the beginning, our Venn diagrams really overlapped a lot, and we're kind of, quibbling a little bit about the 10% that doesn't. So I think he was completely supportive of that point.
I will be honest, for the parts of the panel that I heard, as we mentioned, I didn't hear anyone trying to say plant-based diet wasn't healthful. There was no cardiologist at all of ACC who wasn't giving in that this is the most ideal. I did hear just some bits and pieces of some of the cardiologists mentioning, well, maybe in some populations and some people, Mediterranean may be more sustainable because they still want to eat animal products. But I don't think there was any argument about plant-based nutrition not being very helpful.
I agree. I think, whether it should be 80% plant-based or 90% plant-based, people may have a little bit of push back and forth about that. But I completely agree with the general theme. And in my personal opinion, I think if you're a cardiologist and you're recommending processed red meat at this point, your head's in the sand. Like, you really are not paying any attention to the data.
I agree. And I agree. And for as much as we have said, and people say doctors don't know about nutrition, which is true, I just have to reiterate for all the cardiologists who are listening that I know you agree, I was so impressed with how much cardiologists do care about nutrition this weekend at ACC. I think that prevention was a hot topic and everyone was really excited for your talk. And I think that there was definitely a huge shift happening that way. It was very exciting.
I agree. And I mean, why did we go into medicine? I mean, basically, most people go into medicine because they want to help people.
Right.
And, there are medications that help people. There are procedures that help people. And there are nutrition interventions that help people. They can all help people. So it falls into the same bucket of our whole reason we went into medicine in the first place.
Absolutely. All right. So keep going with Mediterranean. So far we have Predimed, the subset. Okay.
And then there was this cool Greek EPIC prospective cohort study. That's from the very, very big EPIC study. And this Greek subset of this prospective cohort, they looked at like 23,000 people and they followed them for like 8.5 years. And not surprisingly, the higher of the Mediterranean diet score you ate, the lower your mortality. And the higher on the Mediterranean score is fewer animal products and more plants. But then they said, okay, let's look at the individual aspects of the Mediterranean diet score to see which aspects were driving the lower mortality. So what was driving it? Well, moderate alcohol intake was driving it. Low meat consumption was driving it. High vegetable consumption was driving it. High fruit and nut consumption was. high monounsaturated to saturated fat ratio, which means more plant products, high legume consumption. Cereal and dairy had minimal impact in this analysis, and actually fish and seafood had a trend toward increase in mortality. So this diet score suggests that more plant-based nutrition is better.
And more fish consumption was not better.
Well, it was a trend, so I can't unequivocally say that, but
Okay.
I think there's a lot of, since you're bringing that up, I mean, I think there's a lot of mechanistic reasons to think that fish consumption is not helpful. It is recommended in the guidelines, in the new prevention guidelines, fish consumption, and it is an area of some controversy. So it's not unequivocal. But if you look at the Malik study that we mentioned, the Song study that we mentioned, if you replace just 3 or 5% of calories from fish with 3 or 5% of calories from plants, people do better. The fish have, trimethylamine oxide in them. They have saturated fat. They have cholesterol. They have various toxins in them from the ocean, which we often minimize. So there are some mechanistic reasons to think that won't be helpful. Now, omega-3 fats, which fish have, are very important. But it's important to remember that fish don't make them. They just get them because they eat plants. So they're the middleman. So you can just get rid of the middleman and get it in other ways, even with an algae oil supplement if you want to.
Why do you think fish was included in our new guidelines as okay?
I think it was because it is a part of the Mediterranean-style diet pattern, and it is probably the meat that's most prominent in the overarching Mediterranean-style diet. And we know that looking at it from a 500-foot view, the Mediterranean-style diet pattern is more healthful than a Western one, and probably something to do with the omega-3 fats as well. That's my hypothesis.
But there's nothing from your standpoint that we need to eat from fish to be healthful.
No, we do need to get the omega-3 fats, but you can get them elsewhere. So from my standpoint, look, if my patients say, look, I want to have fish 3 times a week, and I'm not going to have less than that, like, great, how about it? But my personal opinion is that even getting rid of the fish is more healthful.
Fish is filled with saturated fat. I know there's omega-3 fatty acids, but it's filled with saturated fat.
And cholesterol.
And cholesterol. I've had diabetics who gave up fish and they were able to decrease their insulin completely. I had a diabetic that was eating a ton of salmon, thinking it was so healthful, and was almost fully plant-based. Salmon was pretty much the only thing that he was still eating. And once he went full in, he noticed his insulin requirements decreasing because all of that saturated fat he was eating was really affecting the amount of insulin he required. And so I do think that there is something to be said for how fatty it is.
I completely agree. And it would be really great to have a randomized trial of a Mediterranean versus a
plant-based
diet.
I know. I feel like the reason why that hasn't been done is because we just know that the more plant forward you are, the healthier. And so it's like that last step, it's the last step just saying, but you're right. There are a multitude of factors. If you don't mind repeating them, what are your biggest multitude of factors why fish could be unhealthful?
So the reason I think that they can be unhealthful are they have trimethylamine oxide, which obviously can promote a variety of diseases. It has saturated fat, which promotes a variety of problems. It has cholesterol. It has a variety of toxins like PCBs and mercury in it, which are not our friend from a health perspective at all. And they often get overlooked when we think about health, or poo-pooed when we think about health in general, which is obviously not a good idea. And of course, you can get the omega-3s elsewhere.
And I think that's such a good point that, people that are eating fish, you're not getting the omega-3s from the fish making them. It's that the fish are getting it from the algae they're eating. And we can get omega-3s from plants as well.
Fish is the middleman.
Fish is same with when we get B12 from animal products. It's the same thing, just the middleman, because animals are eating fortified B12 anyway. Might as well go straight to the source.
Exactly right. So, and then along the lines of fish, if you look, another great Seventh-day Adventist study is this analysis. They looked at about 60,000 people, and they looked at the percentage with diabetes. And since the Seventh-day Adventists treat their bodies like temples, they really have a lot of healthful dietary patterns. And even those who are eating an omnivorous diet, a more Western style diet, eat a much more healthful version than the average Westerner. So what they did is they broke people down into non-vegetarians, semi-vegetarians, pesco-vegetarians, including fish, lacto-ovo-vegetarians, and vegans. And the group with the lowest percentage of diabetes was the vegans at 2.9%, and the pesco-vegetarians had a 4.8% rate of diabetes.
It's fascinating. It's a fantastic study. It makes perfect sense. The less saturated fat you're eating, when we know that saturated fat is a huge culprit in diabetes and insulin resistance, the less saturated fat you're eating, the more likely your diabetes will improve. And that's what the Adventist Health study shows.
Indeed. And when you're eating more saturated fat, particularly when it comes wrapped in animal products, it can be unhealthful for your gut microbiome, which, as you were talking about before, leads to more inflammation, more lipopolysaccharide endotoxemia, which can promote diabetes. And the more saturated fat that you eat, that can get deposited in both your liver and your muscles. And when it gets deposited in your muscles, that can make you insulin resistant, making it harder for insulin to take sugar from your blood and put it into your muscles, which would ultimately cause diabetes. So there's multiple ripple effects in terms of negative mechanistic impact of eating that more animal-based saturated fat type diet.
One thing I will say in defense for the Mediterranean diet, and I kind of had this conversation with Joel on my podcast episode about fad diets, and I know you agree with me here, is that compared to the standard American diet, it's an upgrade. So if you're going to give up bacon and hamburgers and you are at least going more plant forward, I support it. If that's the step you want to make towards your health, I support it. Obviously, I am a fully plant-based person, and I am an ethical vegan as well. So from both a health and ethical standpoint, I definitely do support fully plant-based nutrition. But at the same time, Mediterranean diet is for sure a step up from the standard American diet. And I think at least we can celebrate that we're moving in the right direction.
100% agree. And so we kind of summarize that a Mediterranean style diet is a good diet, but it appears that the more plant-based you go under the umbrella of a Mediterranean style diet, based on clinical and mechanistic studies, the better you do.
Absolutely. That was great. That was so useful because so many people have been so confused about Mediterranean diet. So I just want to clarify here because there's a lot of information. This is very dense with information and it's just so useful for anyone that's been confused about this. So the big selling points of the Mediterranean diet, plant forward. Okay. So we know lots of plants, whole foods, fruits, vegetables, legumes, grains, things like that. Plant forward. And the things that from the Mediterranean diet that you and I would agree that we don't need are fish and olive oil. So you agree, and we can clarify here that we already agreed that we don't need fish. So olive oil. Can you explain why we both don't think you need to be adding olive oil to your diet?
Yeah, that's another controversial topic. And I think the Nutrition Controversies paper that Dr. Freeman was, I believe, the first author on, did from the American College of Cardiology, did support olive oil. But the reason that I prefer my patients not have it, and I don't fully go to the mat on this because we don't have as much evidence to support it as I love. But what you do is you take a perfectly good olive with lots of fiber and nutrients, and you just suck out all the oil, leaving behind all of that other stuff. So it's no longer a whole food. And it is incredibly calorically dense. It's 120 calories per tablespoon, the most calorically dense kind of food that we have. And we do have evidence that olive oil can acutely worsen blood vessel function. In a study by Dr. Vogel, they had people eat a salad, and then brachial artery reactivity or blood vessel function improved. But then they put olive oil on the salad, and the blood vessel function did not improve as much. It's as if the olive oil was mitigating the benefit of the salad. Now, there's some question about maybe extra virgin olive oil would be better, but it's not entirely clear. So we know that blood vessel function can worsen from those Vogel studies with olive oil, and it's not a whole food. And so, and then when you look at Dr. Esselstyn's work, this is a case series of about 200 people with significant stable coronary disease, he put them on a whole food plant-based diet, also without oil. And over about 4 years, those who said they adhered to the diet without olive oil, without oil, that was about 90% of them, so like around 170 or so, they had an event rate of 0.6%. That's what they concluded, a 0.6% event rate. And those who did not follow the diet, but that they could have eaten all kinds of things, had something like a 60% event rate. It's quite impressively different. So, in Esselstyn's study, is it not having the oil? Is that the key thing that drove it forward? It's hard to know. It's hard to tease that out. But that is an unbelievably low event rate. So given the blood vessel function, given that it's not a whole food, given that the overwhelming majority of my patients need to lose weight, and given the Esselstyn work, I support not having oil. And finally, anecdotally, for my patients who I see who have just really, really bad coronary disease, when they go whole food plant-based and also eliminate the oil, that's when I see the most obscene turnarounds ever. Going from, I have one patient who went from nearly on the door of bypass surgery and he didn't want to have it. That's cool. Patient's the boss. To about a year later, running a half a marathon. And these are anecdotes, so you can't base a lot on that. But that's why I lean toward no oil.
Unbelievable. That's a great point. And I do agree with you that although the evidence is anecdotal, in my patients with CAD, based on Esselstyn studies and some of the brachial reactivity data, it does make sense to avoid it, especially because it's so calorically dense. It's so easy to consume 400 calories of olive oil without even noting it. There's no fiber, there's no satiety in it, and there's no micronutrients. So there's, no phytonutrients. There's nothing really, truly that I can see that's beneficial enough for olive oil to outweigh the negatives. So I also, and to be honest, for my patients that don't have CAD or that are younger, I may not be as strict with it, but even for myself, I don't cook with oil because the truth is I tell all of my patients, once you switch over and don't cook with oil, it's so easy. You never miss it.
Yeah, I'm certainly with you on that. And it'll be great if there could be, hopefully there'll be more studies along the way so we could have a richer evidence base.
Yeah, I think also I agree with you. I think also my biggest take on it, maybe even since we don't have enough evidence from the cardiovascular standpoint, not too much. I think my biggest argument for oil being essentially useless is the fact that since it's so calorie dense, like you're saying, if people need to lose weight, you're not really getting a lot of bang for your buck. 400 calories of olive oil isn't going to make you full. It's not going to give you fiber. It's not going to help your gut microbiome be healthier. It's not going to do anything for you.
Well, so then we shifted to the ketogenic or low carb diet. And so my initial point about that was that I think it's based on a popular myth. And that popular myth is that around 1980 or so, we were told to eat low fat, and then we ate low fat, and look at us now, we're fat and sick. Well, although we were told to eat low fat, we didn't do that. We ate more of pretty much everything, including fat. So I think that whole myth is just fake news because we ate more of everything, including fat. And it's important to reinforce here that, of course, you, I, and none of us think that white bread and sugar cookies are healthful. We're talking about whole foods. So along those lines, no long-living society lives in chronic ketosis. So there's one society that's been romanticized like that, the Inuit population that lives really, really far north. And so there's no orange trees there. So they eat a lot of fish and fish blubber. So they eat a lot of animal products, but they don't live longer. They live about the same as people in Canada. And also they've selected for a mutation that makes it harder to go into ketosis. So which suggests that going into a chronic state of ketosis is not advantageous. And then, of course, if you look at the blue zone populations, the populations across the world that live the longest, have the most centenarians, there's some in the Mediterranean and Loma Linda, California, and Okinawa, their diet is more than 50% carbs. So the longest living populations are eating more than 50% carbs. We're talking about whole grains here. So that's not a ketogenic diet. And then if you go to Bolivia, there's the Siman population there. And they're an indigenous group of people, and they live much like their ancestors did. And they have the lowest rate of heart disease ever recorded in the medical literature. What's their diet? 72% carbs. Their vascular age, compared to an average American in the MESA study, is like 25 years younger.
Wow.
And also, if you look at the paper in Lancet, as far as I can tell, they looked at 705 people. Now, they're eating 72% carbs, mind you. And also, they're very active and things. But about 4 of the 705 had an elevated blood glucose. That means 701 had it perfectly normal.
And when you say are eating carbs, we're talking whole foods.
Whole foods. There's no convenience store down where they live. It's whole foods. And so they're really, for the ketogenic diet, there's really, to my knowledge, no real good hard outcome studies with mortality and cardiovascular events. So we need, more data, sort of. And there's a lot of side effects with the ketogenic diet, which are well published in the pediatric epilepsy literature. Now, a ketogenic diet can be helpful in refractory epilepsy. That's by far the exception, not the rule, for why people are eating a ketogenic diet. Now, the side effects, which are well recognized, are arrhythmias, meaning abnormal heart rhythms, a weakening of the heart, a cardiomyopathy, kidney stones, fractures, pancreatitis, various vitamin and mineral deficiencies. So the burden is really on them to prove that it's safe. So what are some mechanisms of harm, potentially, with a ketogenic or a low-carb diet? There's a number. One, for example, is heme iron, and that's the form of iron that's typically found in animal products. The heme iron typically found in plant products is a slightly different molecular structure and doesn't have the same negative effects. But heme iron promotes inflammation, promotes diabetes, can promote atherosclerosis. Non-human primates, there's also this thing called Nu5GC, which is a salicylic acid on cell membranes of non-human primates. Who cares? Well, when we eat the Nu5GC from non-human primates in red meat, there's also some in fish eggs and a little bit in some fish. Our body sees that as foreign, and we create an immune reaction to it, which promotes inflammation and has been speculated to promote diabetes and atherosclerosis by some investigators. Eating more animal foods, like we talked about before, adversely impacts the microbiome with a myriad of effects. There are advanced glycation end products in red meat that we'll eat, which can promote inflammation, oxidative stress. Animal products, eating more of them could increase LDL or bad cholesterol, which does promote heart disease. Antioxidants, on average, there's about 64 times more antioxidants in plant-based foods than animal-based foods. And berries have about 90 times more antioxidants than do fish. And interestingly, in a murine model, a mouse model, which isn't exactly a ketogenic diet, but this is in the low-carb category, when they fed these mice either a low-carb diet, which I think was like 10 or 15% carbs, versus their usual chow, which is something like 40%, versus a more Western-style diet, the group that had the most atherosclerosis of those three were those eating a more atherogenic, a low-carb diet. Those mice eating a low-carb diet compared to their standard chow or a Western-style diet had more atherosclerosis, but their blood pressures were the same, their weight was the same. So it wasn't traditional risk factors. It was actually, it looked at more non-traditional risk factors. And the mice eating the low-carb diet, the one that had more atherosclerosis, they had fewer and less healthy endothelial progenitor cells, and we know more of them can be good. And they had more non-esterified fatty acids, which can promote inflammation. So that's another reason why I will think that an animal-based ketogenic diet is not your friend, because sometimes the keto people will say, well, the blood pressure is the same, this is the same. Like, doesn't that look good for a ketogenic diet? Well, there's many reasons beyond the traditional risk factors that suggest additional harm for the ketogenic diet. Like, look, I have no vested interest one way or the other. I don't have a book to sell you. I don't have a product to sell you. I just want my patients to get better. And the evidence to me suggests that a ketogenic diet is absolutely not going to do that. That's my opinion. So, but why do people eat a ketogenic diet? Well, there's a couple of reasons that it can be effective for weight loss, and there's speculation that it could be good for diabetes. Now, in regard to weight loss, it is indeed good for short-term weight loss, because when you don't eat any carbs, you use up all your glycogen, that's carbohydrate stores in your muscles, and that holds water, so you pee all that out, so you lose that. But then, and you also can get this thing called the keto flu for the first couple of weeks, where you kind of feel crummy when you eat this way, so you'll eat less. And also, ketones attract water, so if you're in a state of ketosis, you can pee out a little bit more. So those things can make you lose weight in the short term. So it is good for short-term weight loss, but so is cocaine. Cocaine is also good for short-term weight loss, and it comes with all the side effects we've already talked about. But in a meta-analysis of
wait, let's clarify. Rob is not suggesting that you guys use cocaine for short-term weight loss.
Thank you for making that clarification.
He's being sarcastic.
Thank you. But in a meta-analysis of 13 studies lasting more than 1 year, a ketogenic diet versus a higher carb, lower fat diet led to less than 1 kilogram of weight loss difference. And, and it comes with all the side effects we've been talking about. So for me, it's fool's gold when it comes to weight loss. It's really throwing out the baby with the bathwater. So the other thing is diabetes. And when you eat no carbs, your blood sugar does go down because you're not eating any sugar. So, but it doesn't, but you're eating all the fat, you're eating all the other pro-inflammatory things. So it doesn't necessarily fix the underlying reason that you have insulin resistance, the fat and inflammation in your muscles and in your liver, which makes it harder for your body to process sugar. So when you don't eat any carbs, your blood sugar will go down, but it's not clear that you're fixing the underlying problem. So for me, reversing diabetes is you can eat a whole grain and your blood sugar doesn't go up. It's not you mask it and you sit within a mile of a carbohydrate and your blood sugar goes through the roof.
Right. We had I had Robbie and Cyrus on, and we did an entire episode on diabetes, and we went through the whole, mechanism and why, when either of them have tried keto diet in the past, how it worked horribly, especially for the type 1 diabetics, because it's not like you're saying, it's not improving your insulin sensitivity. It's not improving insulin resistance, or especially insulin sensitivity for those that are type 1 diabetics. If anything, it's making it significantly worse. And if you took someone on the keto diet that's diabetic and you put them on a glucose tolerance test, they would do horrible. So, instead, now they can eat 500, 700 grams of carbohydrates, and their carbohydrate to insulin ratio is incredibly low because they're not having to use a ton of insulin, because they've increased their body's insulin sensitivity so much through eliminating saturated fats.
There is data that for type 1 diabetics, eating more of a low-carb diet is associated with more coronary atherosclerosis.
Wow.
But it is important to note, and I'll have to find that reference because I can't remember, but it is important to note that when you do lose weight, that weight loss in and of itself may, and of course Cyrus and Robbie are going to be much more expert in this area than I am, that may in and of itself help insulin resistance to some degree.
Of course, to some degree.
So I want us to just be sure, and it will be interesting. There probably are some randomized trials that are going to be started where they specifically look at insulin resistance with these two different dietary patterns, plant-based and ketogenic.
And you can easily look at insulin sensitivity by doing a glucose tolerance test, right?
Exactly.
So you're not fixing diabetes by just not eating carbohydrates.
Right. Well, we'll have to see what these more precise studies show in terms of it. But let's just pretend that the glucose, the insulin resistance, which we have no clear evidence that it does, improves with a ketogenic diet. And we do have evidence that it does improve with a plant-based diet. But let's pretend that it improves with weight loss with a ketogenic diet, which we don't have evidence that it does. But when you eat the ketogenic diet, you're still getting all those other deleterious things we talked about.
Right.
So it's like we're losing the forest for the trees. And along those lines, with a variety of epidemiologic studies more in the low carb category, eating more of a low carb diet is associated with worse outcomes. And of particular interest to cardiologists is a study by Dr. Lee, where they looked at about 4,000 heart attack survivors. It was a prospective cohort study. And those who were initially eating more of a low carb diet did worse. And if you switch to an even more low carb or to a low carb diet after your heart attack, you did even worse. So let's see. But perhaps most importantly with a ketogenic diet is you are leaving out some of the most healthful foods in the world. So first of all, it's whole grains. Whole grains are incredibly healthful. In fact, there was a meta-analysis from Lancet with over 135 million person years of follow-up. And they found that the more whole grains you ate, the longer you lived, the less diabetes you had, and the less heart disease. One question that typically comes up, I think somebody asked it in the Q&A session, is, well, the Pure studies show that if you ate higher carb, you did worse. Well, the higher carb group in the large prospective cohort study that was Pure, they were eating a ton of white rice and they were living in unbelievably impoverished situations with almost no access to medical care. So that was felt to be more of a marker of just having unbelievably destitute living conditions that would promote not optimal health for a variety of reasons. And if you look at the uncontrolled univariate analyses, the more fruits and vegetables people ate, the better they did.
Right.
So that's shifting from whole grains. So pulses, lentils, beans, that's associated with living longer, and those are left out in ketogenic diet. And fruits are among the most healthful foods in the world. So there's this really cool study, two of them actually by Dr. Du. It's a prospective cohort study where there's around 500,000 people in it and many, many million person years of follow-up. And in regard to diabetes, in 480,000 people, they asked, if you eat more fresh fruit, is that good? Is it not good? Turns out it's good. The more fresh fruit you ate, the less incident diabetes or the less diabetes you developed. And they looked at 30,000 people in this cohort that already had diabetes when the study started. And they said, well, if you eat more fresh fruit, is it good? Is it not good? Well, if you had diabetes when the study started, eating more fresh fruit was associated with doing better, living longer and less macro and micro vessel complications. And what the macro is, stroke, heart attack, and the micro is eye disease and kidney disease. So really quite robust data from Dr. Du.
Right.
And accordingly, the American Association of Clinical Endocrinologists recommends a plant-based diet.
Wow.
So kind of like in summary, for a keto diet, there's, to my knowledge, no long living population in a chronic state of ketosis. There's no heart outcomes. We need more safety data. Epi and mechanistic studies don't support benefit and suggest harm, and you are giving up some of the healthiest foods in the world.
So true. Great. That was awesome. That's a great point. I mean, there's literally no reason to do the keto diet because it's not even, the weight loss doesn't last. We know there's long-term detrimental effects that, it's not compatible with healthy living.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the typical ketogenic diet that people eat in the US is an animal-based one. A plant-based ketogenic diet doesn't look quite as bad. And there's some evidence compared to control that it may be a little bit better than control, but there's really not much data there. And it certainly doesn't have anywhere the kind of data that we're a plant-based
And I
diet.
think that the Valter Longo data you may be referring to, it kind of is showing a plant-based keto diet for short term. It's not meant for long-term use.
Yeah, I mean, I don't recommend a ketogenic diet for my patients, whether it be plant or animal based.
Same, likewise, me neither. Well, thank you so much. That was so useful. That was all the information it was like you guys listening were at ACC. This is literally everything Rob covered at the American College of Cardiology. And I just want to thank you, Rob, for just being able to really share all the evidence that supports plant-based nutrition and to be able to stomp out the fake news. The diet space is so hard in these days for patients to navigate, for doctors to navigate, for healthcare providers to navigate. So what's your advice for everyone listening, trying to figure this all out?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me on. And it's a real honor to be here with you and your audience. And there's one other point I wanted to quickly bring up. There was Eat Lancet study,
yes.
Eat Lancet Commission. And what they looked at, this was leading scientists from across the globe. And basically what they recommended is eating more of a plant-based diet. Why did they recommend it? They recommended it because it's good for personal health and planetary health. Because who really cares how healthy you are if there's no planet? No planet, no health. So they are recommending it for both planetary and personal health. And so I think if someone is interested in getting started on a plant-based diet, I think that's wonderful. There's lots of incredible resources out there. The Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine has starter kits. The Plant Nutrition Project has starter kits for people interested in a slightly deeper dive, or medical professionals. They can go to various conferences like the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine conference or our Preventive Cardiology conference on November 2nd. It's www.mecme.org, and you can find it. So there's lots of incredible resources out there. And then there's, Forks Over Knives is an incredible resource. They have a lot of recipes and very practical steps to help you get going. And I do recommend, actually, that my patients and also my colleagues watch a wonderful documentary film, Forks Over Knives. It's about 90 minutes long, and it's a really nice overview about the impact of a plant-based diet. So it's a really nice way to stick your toe in the pool. And actually at Montefiore, where I work, we have a wellness program. Part of it is an inpatient program where we actually have the documentary film, Forks Over Knives, playing on continuous loop for patients on the inpatient TVs for free.
So can they change the channel, or are they forced to watch it?
They're not forced to watch it.
Okay.
There's only so much, you can't get free will. I mean, they could watch Fall on Sunday or whatever they want. What I can do is I can now walk in the patient's room and discuss why I think plant-based nutrition is helpful. We can order plant-based meals for them.
That's awesome.
Which comes with a handout. And then I could sort of outsource some of the education and put on Forks Over Knives. So it's a really nice addition. So that's another useful thing, I think, to help people get started.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much. I mean, you've literally paved the way in this space for so many of us, and everything you've done at Monty is just outstanding. You've really just created a new dynamic in cardiology, and thanks for coming on and giving us all this great information. And for everyone that wants to find you, where can everyone here find you on social media, and where can they find you in the office if they want to come see you?
Oh, great. Thanks. So on social media, I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Dr. Ostfeld. So Dr. Ostfeld, Ostfeld. And our office number, we're located in the Bronx in New York City, is 718-920-5197.
So if you want to schedule with Dr. Ostfeld, you want a preventive cardiologist that focuses on plant-based nutrition in the New York area, he is there. And he has great sessions once a month where you help your patients learn about plant-based eating on the weekend, right?
Yeah, we do. Thank you. We have, there's a variety of aspects to our wellness program, an educational, a clinical, and a research arm. And as part of the clinical arm, we have periodic Saturday morning sessions. We take a deep dive into the how and why of plant-based nutrition. I speak, a nutritionist speaks, we serve a plant-based lunch. We ask people to come with a friend and a significant other or a significant other to help them along the way. and I don't charge patients for it. I fund it all through donations. I want to democratize this information as much as possible. And where we work, there's a very large indigent patient population. And if I were to charge for this, that would really limit access for a bunch of patients. So I'm really happy and honored that we're able to offer this at no charge.
That's incredible. All right. And make sure that next November, you guys sign up to come to the conference at Montefiore, which will be our preventive cardiology conference that Rob runs with great speakers. A lot of plant-based nutrition, a lot of different researchers, scientists, physicians that will be speaking about various topics in health, and it'll be great.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. And you were there last year and you gave an amazing talk.
Wait, question. When can everyone start to sign up for that?
You can start to sign up now. There's an early bird special, and it's the easiest way to get to it would be www.mecme.org. And you kind of have to search around a little bit for our conference on November 2nd. It's not the easiest thing to navigate, but it won't take long. And there is an early bird special in terms of cost. And we have sold out. This is our third conference, and we sold out the last 2 years.
It was awesome.
And so we're really, really excited and honored about that. But once we sell out, there's nothing much more I can do, and I will get like a barrage of emails.
I know. I will be honest. Last year, once you sold out, I was getting emails upon Instagram messages, people begging and pleading to get in and spots. And you were like, we literally just don't have the space. So I would recommend people try to get in soon because the tickets do go fast. And I'll make sure to put the link in the show episode notes.
Thank you. And I'll send you the more complicated link to it as well. That'll go directly to the registration page.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much, Rob. And next up, we are going to be discussing the trials that were released at ACC with Kim Eagle. Okay. Today we are with one of my biggest, most favorite podcasters. You guys know, if you follow me on social media, I'm always talking about Eagle's Eye View with Dr. Kim Eagle. This is Dr. Kim Eagle. Say hi.
Hey there. How are you?
And we're here at the ACC 2019 conference, and Dr. Eagle is going to give us some information about the biggest trials that are going to be at the conference. And before that, we actually wanted to delve into a little bit just about research and knowledge acquisition for people of our generation. So why don't we actually start with that?
Okay. Well, thanks a lot. It's fun to be on a podcast, and I have to say, I think that my generation of learners, we sort of acquired knowledge in a streaming way. We sort of ran it out as a river. And the generation that Danielle and many people who podcast now, it's completely different. You acquire knowledge in bits and you stack it into spaces in your brain that you then try to pull out. And so I think social media, and particularly Twitter and podcasts, have revolutionized medical education. And for me, it's a very exciting time in education because I think the whole thing's being turned on its head. And the idea that we can sit here and reach literally tens of thousands of people, mm-hmm. whereas I may go to a lecture room here and reach 50.
Right.
I mean, the scale is just mindless.
So true.
Right?
So true. Absolutely. Your podcast I actually always use as an example of keeping us up to date. I actually know, so I posted it a lot on my social media, and I've noticed a lot of internal medicine residents who have messaged me and been like, oh my God, I started to listen to this because it's been helping me to keep up to date with the guidelines and the studies. Yeah. And it's just a nice way, an easy way to digest information quickly. And I like that because things are ever evolving, ever changing. There's constantly new publications coming out. So I really do enjoy the way that you give us just kind of a eagle eye view and give us the overlook and allow us to digest the information in an easy way. And it doesn't take forever. We don't need to read the entire article. Or what I love about it too is it gives you this overview, and then you can go back and actually say, I'm going to read this trial. This is a paper I'm actually going to delve into. And I think it's good for not just cardiology fellows in training or cardiologists. It's good for internists and people that are actually, I've noticed that with the advent of social media and with everyone using obviously the internet, that more patients are like, wait, I want to read this study. They're actually more engaged in their own healthcare, and people are actually wanting to read the primary literature themselves.
Absolutely. Well, another part of this, which is sometimes lost on folks, is the volume of knowledge that your generation has had to deal with is logarithmically more than my generation. Virtually everything you do in medicine, testing, it's all new. And so when you are dealing with that volume of knowledge, you have to chunk it and bite it and then stack it into places that you're going to use. And then the other part of this is repetitive learning, so that you can read a guideline, but that's a whole weekend, right? Or you can have somebody help you digest it, and you get those bits. And on acc.org, we get those in journal scans or guideline key points. But then on a podcast, you can get updated, you get repetitive. This is the topic that's really important this week. So I think it's a very exciting time in education.
So what do you think, just a few tips for people that are trying to critically evaluate research studies, and just a few, I know we could talk for this for hours, but just a quick overview of just maybe some things people can do to just critically evaluate research studies and kind of figure out what's a good research study, what's not a great research study. And
so Danielle, you're really asking a huge question.
I know.
So the challenge with research, of course, is, do we have enough control of groups that are being compared to feel confident that differences that are identified are actually real? Or are they due to either sample size issues or internal bias, one group versus another? We love big clinical trials because they hopefully answer a single question in a very clear way. Unfortunately, they're very expensive to do.
Right.
And knowledge keeps changing. So we base a lot of our decision-making in cardiology on observational research. So we actually need both. But, this is certainly a place where the size of the research cohorts really matters. I'm going to be presenting data on aortic dissection here on Monday from the IRED registry. We had 9,000 patients.
Wow.
When you start comparing groups with that number, you can feel a lot more confident the differences that you're being led to are important. Whereas you see smaller studies that come to conclusions of there's a trend, or I love this non-inferiority.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, the concept of non-inferiority is I have a new product and I want to just prove that it's not hurting people.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's so funny.
I'm sorry. I apologize to the trialists out there, but it drives me nuts, frankly.
Does. Well, one question I have for you particularly, I think that you would be very helpful to answer. So obviously, as you know, I'm very into nutrition research, and there's a lot of, the Twitter universe is abound with just multiple different opinions. And the biggest criticism, I think, of nutrition research in general is that a lot of it's epidemiology and a lot of it's observational, and it's not necessarily randomized controlled trials. So my question for you is, what do you think the best way for us to start to do and look at nutrition research in a way that's going to actually make guideline changes and ways that people will start to accept the data if there's so much issue with these observational studies?
Well, I think that if you think about nutrition, it's ubiquitous in the world. It's with us every day, and it changes every day. And pressures around our eating habits change every day. So it's very hard to standardize diets and expect people to adhere to them for the kind of length of time you're going to need if you're going to say it changes mortality or heart events. So there's two ways I would think about it. One is based on population-based epidemiologic work. Can we find sort of consistent messages across all of them? And I think we can. Clearly, caloric intake matters a lot. Clearly, as we look across the landscape, no matter what name you call it, people who eat a more balanced diet, particularly with vegetables, generally appear to have better outcomes. One thing that your generation can do is to try to study physiology, because we understand that just a meal right now can change our vascular structure, can change vascular reactivity. So if we can find some sort of surrogate endpoints that we think are consistent with likely future benefit, that may be where we need to start.
That's brilliant. That's fascinating. It's an interesting way to look at it. Well, thank you for answering those questions. So I wanted you to delve into, because you are the expert, and I am so excited to hear this, your take on ACC 2019. So what are the big trials? What is the big research that is going to be coming out of this conference, and how is it going to change cardiology?
This is a huge conference. There's like 25 trials that are really important, but I would probably, there are 5 of them that I think are particularly relevant to my practice. There's one called Augustus, which is a trial that's looking at patients who have atrial fibrillation who receive a PCI. And it's a randomized trial comparing apixaban to warfarin, and then whether you're on clopidogrel alone or clopidogrel plus aspirin, so-called triple therapy.
Yeah.
So that trial is going to really be important because we have a lot of patients with AFib on anticoagulants, and we're wrestling with, do I need 2 antiplatelets or can I get away with 1? So I think Augustus will answer that, and it will change practice, I think, immediately.
Absolutely.
There's 2 huge trials with TAVR here. One is Partner 3, and the other's looking at Evolute, which is a self-expanding valve, aortic valve, in low-risk patients. If these 2 trials end up showing that TAVR is as good as surgery or potentially even better, then aortic valve replacement in terms of an open approach is going to become a rare thing.
Unbelievable.
And who would have thought?
Who would have thought?
Right? So I think that's a really important set of trials. Probably if they're favorable, it will change the landscape a lot. There's 2 other studies that are, they're not old news, but they're sort of evolution of previous trials. One is the Odyssey trial, which you're aware of, looking at alirocumab in patients who've had an ACS. At this meeting, they're going to talk about how being on the drug over a period of 3 or 4 years, what happens to not the first event, but second, third, fourth events.
Wow.
And what I think it's going to show, I don't know the results yet, but I think it's going to show that when we get LDLs really low, that we're not just dealing with first events and second events, but we're reducing third and fourth and how many events in the future a patient has. Massive. This really is game-changing in how we think about prevention trials, not just that, because a lot of times they're blanked after the first event.
Right.
And then the other one, of course, is COAPT, which is obviously the new frontier in valve therapies. Who would have thought that a little clip would have such a benefit? And they're going to show data here looking at functional outcomes in patients who've had a mitral clip. And once again, it wouldn't surprise me if it's a very favorable result.
Wow.
So those are, for me, the 5 trials that really have my attention. There's a lot more. There's another trial looking at SGLT2 inhibitors in patients with diabetes and heart failure, and it's breaking down the benefit. This is called a DECLARE, looking at patients with HFrEF versus HFpEF. We really think that this group of drugs is the next game changer in patients with diastolic dysfunction, 40% of whom have diabetes. So we're starting to see inroads in diastolic heart failure.
Diastolic heart failure for so long has been this no man's land.
Slow the heart rate, control the blood pressure, keep the volume down. But the diabetic cohort, which is a big part of diastolic dysfunction, it looks to us like the SGLT2 inhibitors have maybe unique properties to improve outcomes there.
Wow. What's the mechanism of that?
I'm not an. I'm a bean counter. I'm just a dumb old bean counter here sitting with you at ACC.
That's fascinating. That's an interesting one.
Well, it's sodium glucose transport, of course.
Okay.
And so clearly what's probably, there's some effect on the primary muscle through that mechanism, but I have to tell you, I'm not a physiologist.
No. I will say that ties into a lot of what I say, which is regards to the fact that obviously with metabolic syndrome, all these diseases are related. Actually, and we see this with nutrition, obviously all the time, patients who are able to, that come see me I have a plant-based preventive cardiology clinic I do through my fellowship program. And so patients come from pretty much all over to see me and go fully plant-based. We just provide traditional preventive care. And I've been able to see over the last year patients, they reverse their diabetes through nutrition, but then additionally, they'll reverse their hypertension, their angina will improve. Everything in general seems to be in conjunction with, the overall improvements with every body system in many ways. I actually have one patient who I've written up as a case report whose even his hypothyroidism improved once he lost 60 pounds. And I have no explanation for that. I'm no endocrinologist, but I do think that there is a lot to that. So that's fascinating that they're going to be looking at it through drug therapy, through those specific diabetes.
Well, it's obviously going to be complementary to reducing salt or eliminating salt.
Of course. Yeah. That's fascinating. So what else do you think is big on the frontier of prevention?
Well, obviously, the prevention guidelines are being released here and talked about. I think the sense that using calcium scoring in certain populations to stratify risk better is something I'm doing a lot of.
I love calcium score.
I do too. I really think it's a window into a person's future. And really, if you look at what happens when you do a MESA risk estimate, when they have a moderate calcium score, it moves them from low to much higher risk. And suddenly you're saying, you know what? We have to go after this. And ironically, of course, when we offer them a medication, some of them actually then embrace diet. Say, I don't want to take a pill, but I'll do what you tell me. Right. Which is great.
Yeah. So I of course, believe in medications in addition to diet and lifestyle, but I do think that the calcium score is great in the fact that we've, obviously so many people have asymptomatic CAD. And like you're saying, it gives you a window because, someone could have many risk factors for coronary artery disease, have a negative stress test, and that gives them all this reassurance. Well, there's nothing wrong, and they can just continue on their life with their lifestyle without making modifications like quitting smoking and things like that. But like you were saying, it's a perfect window into seeing, well, there is something brewing there, and this is something you need to get on top of now.
Yeah, it's a really important test.
So do you think that anything else with regards to imaging is going to change as well with now? I mean, cardiac CT is just so great.
So I think that all of the imaging platforms are improving. So if we look at echo, I think that strain is really changing the practice around things like cardio-oncology. If you look at nuclear imaging, the ability to use SPECT or PET starts to get at, okay, are you ischemic or are you hibernating? Is it alive? MR is now the tool of choice for understanding heart muscle disorders and what's going on. So it's, if you're an imager, this is brave new world because we're able to look at things in a completely different fashion. We're getting at phenotype. That's the important thing. So we haven't understood how to manage diastolic heart failure because it's about 20 different phenotypes. So with genetics and imaging and proteomics, suddenly we might have the tools to sort of say, okay, that is this group of patients and they respond this way. It's a game changer.
That's fascinating. Yeah, it's true. Being able to get things more individualized per patient. Do you think that with regards to prevention, that especially with the advance of imaging, this is going to change interventional cardiology in any way? I know a lot of my co-fellows who are planning to do interventional cardiology think about that, especially with CT. I mean, it's like diagnostic cap. I can imagine in many, many, many ways will really drop out of favor.
Well, for lower risk patients, CT angio is fine now.
Yeah.
I think interventional cardiology is moving headstrong towards structural heart disease.
Yes, agreed.
It's ironic, isn't it? We look at arrhythmia therapy, and we've really moved from drug treatments that are really pretty toxic to interventional ablation. Right. Coronary therapy is the opposite.
So
My
true.
generation, all we had was bypass and angioplasty.
Right.
The statins weren't available to until the mid-'80s.
Right.
Now we're preventing the events. And so the interventional platforms are moving toward valve therapies and Watchman devices and all kinds of cool stuff that previously required open surgery.
So true. It's so true. I wonder if that's how the surgeons feel about that.
Well, the smart ones are reinventing themselves, right?
Getting involved in structural,
It's sort of like you're either at the table or you're on the menu.
Sure.
and when things are changing, those who survive are the ones who adapt.
Yeah.
This is Darwin 101.
Yeah.
And that's the wonderful thing about cardiology. It's moving so fast. And if you're able to see that future way and go for it, how exciting.
So what made you choose cardiology as a specialty?
I think I liked the physiology and I liked the fact that patients were sick and that we had a lot of knowledge. We could do something. And I was always fascinated by applying evidence to decisions. That I studied that at the Harvard School of Public Health when I was training as a cardiology fellow. I like to think about problems from the point of view of having data to answer them. And so outcomes research was just that was a niche that I was drawn to.
That's interesting. And did you ever consider any other specialty, or was it always cardiology?
Well, when I was a house officer, it was infectious disease or cardiology for me.
Wow. Interesting. I never really hear those two in conjunction.
Well, they're both. I liked infectious disease because it was kind of like Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, right? It is like Sherlock Holmes.
But it was during the AIDS epidemic, actually. So the specialty and the fellowship was kind of all about that, which is if you were fascinated by it. But I loved the range of cardiology.
Yeah. Well, any advice for our listeners who are in medicine that are starting their medical careers and either in medical school or going through residency training or new attendings?
Well, I guess the thing I would say is embrace the reason you went into medicine. Never let that go. The humanity part of patient care is the thing that gives me the greatest joy. And there are forces around you that can cause you to lose that. Whether it's the electronic medical record or high throughput, you name it. But I think every physician has the ability to adapt to whatever they're dealing with and preserve that patient care experience and have it be magic. It's hard to do.
There's a lot of discussion these days about burnout, physician burnout.
Absolutely. I mean, I see with 2 fellows, about 30 patients on Wednesdays.
Oh my gosh.
It's a lot of work. So what do? We pre-round very carefully.
Yeah.
We know exactly what we want to do when we
Right.
see those patients.
Right.
We give them our time, but it's not like we're spending an hour with them. So you
Quality over quantity.
and we use templates with Epic that work pretty
Right.
well
I love
to
Epic
save
too.
time. And I think if you work at it, you can preserve human part. What I would say to the house officers who listen to this is, I tell our house officers when I'm teaching them, I want them to own the patient. I don't want them to feel like their responsibility goes when they go home at 7 o'clock. They have to know what happens the next day.
Right.
And if they don't, they're missing such a critical part of their education.
Critical part.
Which is what happened from the orders I wrote last night, or when I'm off service. Well, you know what? If you had 12 patients, follow them electronically. Find out what happened.
I actually find like medicine, especially when I was a resident, I felt so attached to my service that I would go home and like sometimes not be able to like wait till the morning to find out. Like, if I knew someone was going for CT angio, I'd have to just check. I just had to know. Even though I wasn't on night float, I would just have to know. I just feel like sometimes, it's just a part of, especially when you're in training, you just do really feel really.
So that
invested.
passion for patients is something you always want to protect.
Right.
And it can get crowded out by all the types of forces that we deal with in our professional lives.
Right.
So fight that tooth and nail. Never let go of that patient.
That's great. How do you handle, doing everything you do? You're involved with ACC and everything you do with regards to patient care. How do you structure everything so that way you don't get burnt out?
So I think if I have one gift, it's organizational talent. I am very good at organizing my life, and I'm very successful in identifying people who share a vision and do stuff together. So I think medicine is team-based, care is team-based, education is team-based, research is team-based. So I've been very fortunate in Michigan to be able to find people who enjoyed working together and do things that we feel are making a difference.
Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. I hope you'll have me back.
Absolutely. And everyone, so tell everyone where they can find you.
So you can find me on Eagle's Eye View on acc.org, and you can follow me on Twitter at KEagleMD.
And I will make sure everything will be in the show notes and you will be able to find Dr. Eagle. And I promise you, you guys already know this, it is my number one favorite go-to cardiology podcast. It is where I get all of the latest and greatest from cardiology. And you do it so succinctly. It's just so wonderful because it's the perfect overview. It's the exact amount we need.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.